The Mets starting rotation continues to be hit by injuries. At what point will top prospect Nolan McLean enter the picture to help this team?
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Now, the Mets had a very impressive victory on Thursday night as they beat the Braves to split their 4-game set, and in doing so, they moved into first place in the National League East again, going ahead of a Phillies team that scored, like 1 run against the Astros in that 3-game set. Talk about some brutal offense. Yeah, they lost 2-1 on Thursday, and they got shut out in the other 2 games in Houston. They lost 1-0 on Tuesday, 2-0 on Wednesday, and again 2-1 on Thursday. So suddenly the Mets have a half a game lead in this division, but the biggest news surrounding this team right now is yet another starting pitcher goes down. First, it was Kodai Senga recently, then it was Tyler McGill, now Griffin Canning, and Carlos Mendoza told us what we were all fearing after the game. The Mets suspect that this is an Achilles injury, which would be a season ender for Canning. Might even take him out of next season, or at least a large portion of next season. And this is not an injury that's easy to come back from. Not to say that Tommy John is or anything like that, a shoulder surgery, hip surgery, but an Achilles in particular is so difficult. So this is just devastating news for Griffin Canning. I did a live stream after the game where I did break down everything from the Mets' heroic pitching out of the bullpen and the bats and what they did. And I also spent a fair bit of time on Canning. I was speculating because as I was recording right after the game, I didn't know that Mendoza said that about the Achilles. Even then, I really did get into this situation, what it means for him, what it means for the team. And we will talk more about what's next in a second here. But I just have to say it again. For Griffin Canning, you just feel awful for the guy. Career year he was in the middle of, 3.77 ERA. The fact that the Mets got over 75 innings from Canning at that ERA for $4.5 million is an absolute bargain. And he was going to double that salary at least next year. Probably could have tripled it. And he maybe could have gotten a multi-year deal if he had kept this up and he had stayed in the Mets rotation all season. So just awful news for him. I will get into what the Mets are going to do next, but I also wanted to note something just off the heels of that performance from the bullpen, particularly the 4 1/3 innings the Mets got from Austin Warren, who pitched 2 1/3 of that, and Daniel Nunez, who looked unbelievable, looked like 2024 Daniel Nunez again, which is a great sign for this team moving forward. But Warren, he was the guy that followed Canning, went 2 1/3, and really helped this team when they desperately needed it. And it made me just wonder, when you look at the 4A guys, the guys that are up and down from Syracuse to the Mets, that might only pitch in a game and then get sent right back down an option so they get a fresh arm up. I was curious how well those guys have pitched collectively this year. Because if there's one thing that David Stearns is great at, it's accumulating depth. And it's one of these winning within the margins things that people don't really understand, or you don't get a full scope of it, because it's just, hey, Austin Warren went 2 1/3 in that one game, and then he might get sent down today, and you might not see him for 2 weeks, and it just kind of fades. So I looked into all of these guys, what I would call the optionable 4A relievers. I am excluding the prospects, the homegrown guys. So, Jonathan Pintaro just came up and made that appearance. I didn't factor him in. Daniel Nunez, not a prospect, but a homegrown guy. I didn't put him into this equation. I also didn't put Huascar Brazoban or Max Cranington into this equation because they have been, fully established in the bullpen all year. But with that said, worth noting, these are optional relievers that David Stearns picked up for next to nothing. And Brazoban's got a 3 ERA in 42 innings. Kranick a 3.65 in 37 innings. But you go through the list. Jose Castillo made 13 appearances, pitched to a 2.38 ERA. Genesis Cabrera, 3.52 ERA in 6 games. Brandon Waddell, 3.09 ERA now in 11 2/3. Ty Adcock, a 3 ERA in 3 innings pitched. Chris Stefanski, 3.6 ERA in 5 innings pitched. Justin Hageman, a 1.50 ERA in 6 innings pitched. Justin Garza, a 5.4 ERA in 6 2/3 innings pitched. Jose Urena gave up 5 runs in 3 innings pitched. I didn't have his ERA here. I think it was like over 14, but that's a good example because a lot of teams will have a handful of Jose Urenas on their stat sheet for the season of guys that made an appearance, got knocked around, never saw him again. You look at these names for the Mets, you have Urena, you have Tyler Zuber, who gave up a couple runs in his 2 innings, so he has an ERA of 9 on the season. You have Kevin Herget, who had a 4.50 ERA in 2 innings pitched, and then you have Richard Lovelady, who gave up 2 runs in an inning and 2/3, and then you have Warren, who has yet to give up a run this year in 3 1/3 innings pitched. So he's made 2 appearances clearly. So you put it all together: Jose Castillo, Genesis Cabrera, Brandon Waddell, Ty Adcock, Chris Stefanski, Justin Hageman, Justin Garza, Jose Urena, Austin Warren, Tyler Zuber, Kevin Herget, and our boy Dickie Lovelady. You put it all together, 12 relievers. They've combined to give up 28 runs in 63 1/3 innings pitched. That's a 3.98 ERA. And if you remove Urena, who gave up the 5 runs in the 1 appearance and we never saw him again, that ERA drops to 3.55. To have a 3.55 ERA from 11 guys that have been up and down on the taxi squad, that's remarkable. It really is. Like, it's just one of those things that we don't think about that David Stearns excels at. You say, oh, he's not aggressive enough, he's not making enough move. Like there's still the David Stearns haters that I interact with every once in a while. And these are the things I like to show you to say, look, other GMs aren't doing that. They aren't collecting all of these guys. And so that 3.55 ERA for most teams for these shuttle squad guys, it's probably like an 8 ERA or a 6 ERA. And that loses you some games. So that really is an underrated aspect of this Mets team this year, the way these guys have come up and largely performed very well. And even Urena, who gave the 5 runs in 3 innings pitched, he capped off a 19-5 win for the Mets, pitching the final 3 innings. So those runs that he gave up, sure, they don't look great on his ERA for the season, but they were really, honestly, 9 outs the Mets really needed that day. So that's just something I wanted to note here before we get into what's next for this rotation. And I'll talk about Nolan McLean as an option in the next segment for a guy that could fill a role soon. He's not going to be the answer to fill Canning's spot in the rotation. And really, Sean Manaea is going to take this spot in the rotation. So the plan right now, as reported by Will Salmon of The Athletic, he said Blade Tidwell will join the Mets this weekend in Pittsburgh. And the reason why it's going to be Tidwell is because he was optioned on June 21st. He's on the 40-man roster. This is the one opportunity when an injury happens where the Mets can bring him back on the roster without waiting the 15 days of his assignment back to AAA. So because Canning goes down, Canning hits the IL, Tidwell comes back up. Now, he was going to start on Thursday. Luckily, that start got rained out for Syracuse. So now you look at what the Mets can do with Blade Tidwell. He can pitch out of the bullpen as a long man tonight if the Mets need it. Let's just say they score 9 runs on Mitch Keller. Not likely. We'll preview the series in the final segment. Let's just go down the hypothetical highway. And David Peterson, his pitch count's elevated. He gets through 5 innings, and that's it. He only gives up 2 runs. The Mets are winning 9-2. Well, now you can go to Blade Tidwell and see if he can maybe finish that game for you. If the situation doesn't call for it, if David Peterson pitches a gem, he gets through 7, the Mets are winning 2-0, and they want to go to their high leverage guys, you can sit on Tidwell. And then on Saturday, you can pitch him after Paul Blackburn. To me, that's the more likely landing spot for where the Mets would need Blade Tidwell to sort of piggyback Blackburn. I think that even could potentially be a likely plan for this team, where he's a break glass in case of emergency guy on Friday, but on Saturday, he's really expected to pitch. And then if he goes on Saturday, then he will be good to go for a spot start next week. He'll stay on the roster the whole time. If you look at where the Mets are at, I did talk about this a bit on the live stream, but now I've kind of dove into a little bit deeper because the Mets have an off day on Monday. Things are set up really well where Clay Holmes will start on Tuesday on 5 days rest. And then you can go to the same 3 guys that are pitching this weekend. So David Peterson, Paul Blackburn, and Frankie Montas. Those guys can then pitch on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. If the Mets wanted to, because Tidwell would pitch on Saturday or Friday, but I think more likely Saturday, a day before Montas, they can go with Tidwell for a spot start on Friday against the Yankees next week. Then they go to Montas, and they can then option Tidwell, grab a reliever for the rest of the series against the Yankees. So that's what I think they will do here. And then Sean Manaea, assuming he makes his rehab start on Wednesday and all goes well, it could be Tuesday or Wednesday. We still don't know yet, but he is expected to make one more rehab start for the Syracuse Mets. And that would be next week. He started to throw today. I think he'll throw a bullpen over the weekend. And if all goes well, he'll be good to return. And then you can slide him into the rotation for the final week before the All-Star break. And let's just say, again, he makes that rehab start on Wednesday. That means he would be in line to pitch on the following Tuesday on 5 days rest. David Peterson, who's also likely going to pitch on Wednesday, would then also be on 5 days rest. So the Mets could choose. Do they want to get Sean Manaea 2 starts before the All-Star break and maybe also, let David Peterson get a little bit of a breather if they do want to go down that road? Manaea could pitch on Tuesday, and he would be the guy that pitches twice in the final week before the break. He'd pitch Tuesday and Sunday. You'd have Peterson pitch on Wednesday, so on and so forth. Blackburn, Montas, Holmes would all get their turn in the rotation as well. That gets you to the break. On the other side of the break, that would be your 5-man rotation. Sean Manaea, David Peterson, Paul Blackburn, Frankie Montas, and Clay Holmes, not necessarily in that order, but those would be the 5 guys that you would roll with. You would potentially get Kodai Senga back at some point in late July, if not early August, and then the Mets, of course, might make a move at the trade deadline. But the point being, this is not a team that is hurting for starting pitching depth that won't be able to cover this because of Montas just returning to this rotation, as well as Manaea set to return soon. But if there's another setback or something else happens or somebody else goes down because these starting pitchers are dropping like flies, at some point you have to wonder if top prospect Nolan McLean can find his way into this rotation. I want to talk about that in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided to go to a game last minute? You're heading to the ballpark with your friends and family, and you're wondering, all right, well, where can I get tickets? Well, Game Time will come in clutch for you because it's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying tickets. I'll tell you what, the Mets are in Pittsburgh this weekend. PNC Park is my favorite ballpark that I've been to. If I was living out in the Northeast, I might make the drive this weekend, and I would use Game Time to get my tickets. Game Time is the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, making it easy to browse the app for an exciting upcoming MLB game. Game Time has last-minute tickets and zone deals for big savings. See views right in the app before you buy. You know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Down the Game Time app. Create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets. Lowest price guaranteed. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 14,000 subscribers. So let's first talk about Blade Tidwell before we get into Nolan McLean and why Tidwell is the answer right now instead of McLean. Blade Tidwell made his MLB debut on May 4th, gave up 6 runs to the Cardinals in 3 2/3 innings pitched. But his last start against the Phillies was much better for the first time in his career, I believe, pitching on regular rest, 4 days rest. He allowed 2 earned runs on 4 hits and 3 walks, struck out 4. He put up 3 zeros to begin that game against the Phillies. And that took place, remember, in Philadelphia. Not an easy ballpark to pitch in. Then, in the 4th inning, he gave up a couple of singles, walked a batter to load the bases. In between all those base runners, there was a strikeout. So he faced Otto Kemp with the bases loaded and 1 out. Got that chopping ground ball to Brett Beatty that just had a little bit too much hang time off that bounce for the Mets to turn 2. Otherwise, he would have been through 4 innings unscathed. Instead, they only get 1 out, and a run came in to score. The Mets went to the bullpen. I believe it was Jorge Castillo. He gave up an inherited run before he got out of the inning, and so Tidwell ends up giving up 2 in 3 2/3. But he did pitch really well, and you see what he has to offer. The fastball is really good, and it was located particularly well against the Phillies. If that pitch is on and he can locate it, he's going to be able to get big league hitters out. The question is the secondaries, and they were a lot better in his last start than the first one that we saw, and it's something that he's been working on all year in AAA. Got a sweeper, that's the primary secondary. He's got a slider. Both of those pitches, again, he's not completely consistent with, but he's getting better. If he can land those pitches for strikes, he can be a quality starting pitcher. He also has a two-seam, a sinker that he can go to. He's working on a changeup. There's a 5-pitch mix in here. It's just not fully realized. He has a 4.76 ERA in the season. Do I think that Blade Tidwell is a better pitcher right now than Nolan McLean? Absolutely not. Do I think that Blade Tidwell is better suited to make a big league start right now than Nolan McLean? Again, really no. But he's on the roster. And his last start was pretty good. And he does have more experience pitching in AAA than McLean does. He spent most of last year in AAA, and he's been in AAA all year this year. McLean had a little brief cameo in AA. I believe it was 5 starts where he dominated. And then it might have even been 4 starts. And then he made his way up to AAA. In AAA so far, McLean has a 2.68 ERA in 8 games, 6 starts. He followed a couple of those Frankie Montas rehab starts. He has 43 2/3 innings pitched in Syracuse this year. So he's not even over 50 innings pitched at the highest level of the minor leagues just yet. But he's the Mets' top prospect right now. And I'm saying top prospect in the organization, although I'd still potentially hear out an argument for Jet Williams or Carson Bench. So I think those 3 guys are kind of the top tier. And then the other prospects start falling a little bit below that. Jonah Tong, definitely closer to that top tier than what's behind him. And you get into Jacob Reimer, AJ Ewing, Brandon Sproat still in that mix somewhere. So there's a lot of different prospects here, but Nolan McLean is the guy right now in this system that is the most exciting. He spins the heck out of the ball. His fastball has both ride to it and run. So you're talking about a pitch that isn't just going to play up in the zone. He can really locate it anywhere. And there's just a ton of movement to it that makes it so tough on hitters. It's averaging in the mid-90s, but he can get it up to 97. And what he really does well is he just has an incredible feel for breaking balls. His sweeper is absolutely disgusting. He lands it for a strike nearly 2/3 of the time across his professional career. That's remarkable for a pitch that has that much sweep to it, that much horizontal break. The fact that he has it on a string like that, that's the separator between Nolan McLean and Blade Tidwell. I would say fastballs, I'd probably still go with McLean's over Tidwell's, but it's not a big gap. But when you get to the secondaries, there's a pretty large gap between what McLean can do right now and what Tidwell can do. You again, look at that sweeper. That's nasty. He has a gyro cutter, which has more downward break to it, less sweep, of course, than the sweeper. So it's not going to have that same horizontal east to west sweep, but it does still break that way, but it's going to dip more and dive more with the downward action. So when you're, a hitter and you're in your mind thinking, okay, this is a count for the sweeper, and you're trying to account for that incredible sweep, especially if you're a left-handed batter and you're looking for that, and instead he drops a cutter on you. If you just think about it, all of a sudden that pitch, that's breaking into you, if you're expecting to break into you more, and instead it has a little more downward action than you expect, and it's not sweeping as much, all of a sudden that's a pitch that that could end up off the end of your bat and below your barrel that you're just weakly hitting into the ground. So that's a pitch that he can effectively use against lefties to get ground balls. But he can use pretty much all of his pitches against lefties and righties because of the feel that he has for those breaking balls. And that's a pretty enticing package that he has. There's also a curveball that has a chance to be a plus pitch one day as well. He doesn't have it on lock as well as the sweeper or the gyro cutter. But again, he has so many weapons, and he's a really exciting prospect. The issue right now, though, is there's not a long runway for somebody to grab a spot in this rotation because of the depth the Mets have, because Manaea is soon to return, because Senga is not expected to be out for the next 2-3 months. There's a good chance he could be back early August at the latest, maybe even late July. So when you have these guys that are potentially coming back, Tyler McGill, he's not necessarily out for the year either. There isn't that clear opportunity for McLean to get 5 starts in a rotation, and you don't want to have a roster casualty on the 40-man roster just to have McLean make one spot start. If you look at the Mets 40 right now, they have 9 players that are on the 60-day IL. So you have Danny Young, Christian Scott, and AJ Minter, who will not return of those 9. You have Nick Madrigal, who I don't think will return, and I just don't expect he's going to make an impact on the Mets this year. And then you have Drew Smith, who could theoretically make it back in September. It's probably unlikely, but there's a chance. So for now, though, that's 5 guys that are going to stay in the 60 for a while. But it leaves you with Sean Manaea, Jose Siri, Jesse Winker, and Brooks Raley, who could all theoretically make their way back to the roster before the deadline, if not a little bit after. Siri is the one big question mark, but Manaea, he should be back in a little over a week. Jesse Winker is expected to begin a rehab assignment in Brooklyn over the weekend. Brooks Raley is 10 days into his rehab assignment, pitching in Port St. Lucie. So he's got 20 days left, so about 3 more weeks. Probably a similar timetable to Winker. Those are 3 guys that are going to have to come back onto the 40-man roster. Then you're going to have to make a corresponding move. Now, Canning is going to end up on the 60. So that's going to take care of one of those. So you can kind of look at Manaea and Canning as an eventual swap when it comes to the 40. But when you look at the rest of it, the other 2 guys, I mean, now you're cutting into whether it's a Travis Jankowski when you get Winker back, although I think they probably want to keep Jankowski's speed as the final man on the bench, especially with Acuna not in the roster. So then maybe it's Jared Young who goes down. Could be today, or when Winker comes back, and he could be the roster casualty for Winker, even if he's already in AAA, the Mets could DFA him. So that's an option. Or then you're getting into all those relievers I talked about in the first segment, Ty Adcock, Chris Devanski, Tyler Zuber. Those are the 3 that I would say are probably next on the bubble to be a 40-man roster casualty. But I think the Mets would prefer to keep those guys on the roster for as long as they can until there is a clear runway for Nolan McLean to be in the rotation or in the bullpen if they ever decide to shorten him up this year to be an impact arm out of that pen. You're going to wait until there is an absolute defined role in the big league roster for your top prospect. Until then, you're going to keep him in Syracuse, allow him to continue to develop, and you have a top prospect as well in Blade Tidwell, who is already on the 40, that is ready to step in this weekend, potentially pitch out of the bullpen, make a spot start next week, then go back down to AAA. And you're good until another injury pops up. And then you'll assess from there. But for right now, no, I do not think Nolan McLean has a shot at making this roster anytime soon, which is a little bit unfortunate. But also I understand it from a 40-man roster perspective. And I think if they need him this season, he'll be ready. But they just might be in a position where it's just build McLean up as much as possible in AAA. And this guy could be a huge part of the 2026 Mets rotation. But you never know. 3 weeks ago, the Mets rotation looked a lot different. So a couple things happen, and McLean is a guy that if there is ever a runway for a guy to be in the rotation for like a month or more, I think he can grab that spot and he might not ever look back. To close out the show, going to talk about the Mets series against the Pirates, and also there is a roster move coming today. Mark Vientos will be back. We'll touch on it one last time, who's going down, and then we'll get into our series preview. All of that coming in just a minute. If you're an everydayer that's always tuning into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. Start texting service. We get updates from me. Anytime news breaks in the Mets, you can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. You get a live graphic sent to your phone each day so you know the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so let's now talk about the Mets' decision here with Mark Vientos one last time. He's good to go. They just wanted to give him an off day on Thursday, and they probably wanted to give Ronnie Mauricio one last start potentially before they make their decision. My gut still says that Mauricio goes down, even if that's not what I think I want anymore. Mauricio in his final game, potentially, we'll see, went 1 for 4 on Thursday night with 2 strikeouts. First at bat, got into a 3-0 count, then watched a couple of strikes on some hittable pitches, got to a full count. He got a center cut fastball, put it in the outfield for a base hit. Next at bat, chased a couple of pitches outside of the zone, struck out. Third at bat, hits the second pitch that he sees, curveball that kind of hung up there a little bit for him, and he crushed it, but Michael Harris was able to make a catch on a well-struck baseball. Final at bat, expanded the zone again, struck out. If you look at the numbers, though, for Ronnie Mauricio swinging from the left side, because he is a switch hitter, so far this season, he's hitting 277, 320 on base, 511 slug. That's an 833 OPS. 831 OPS. That's not bad. All 3 home runs have come from the left side. So there is a case to be made that if you are trying to pick, okay, who should be the left-handed complement to Starling Marte at DH? You might say, actually, it shouldn't be Jared Young. It should be Ronnie Mauricio. And the best part, that allows you to, instead of playing Mark Vientos at third base, you could put Mauricio at second, Beatty at third, DH Vientos. So to me, that's still what I'd prefer. I think that makes the Mets the best possible team. At the same time, I also understand that the Mets probably want to play Beatty and Vientos nearly every single day. If Ronnie Mauricio is not swinging it well from the right side, he's not complimenting a Beatty to be part of any type of a platoon anyway. So you get to a point where, because in some ways his skill set is overlapping Brett Beatty a lot right now as a guy that can play second and third, that swings it from the left side well. That to me, well, I mean, Beatty obviously only swings it from the left side, but swings it well against right-handed pitching from the left side. That's where I think the Mets still might end up going with Mauricio back down to the minor leagues to play every day so that they can get Beatty, Vientos, McNeil, Marte, all these guys in there a little bit more along with Tyrone Taylor. So that's still what I think is going to happen. But if it was up to me at this point, I would just get rid of Jared Young, let Ronnie Mauricio stay on the roster until Jesse Winker comes back, and then you make a decision at that point, whether it's Mauricio or Beatty that goes down for Jesse Winker. But for now, at this stage, again, my expectation still is likely Mauricio. Also, Carlos Mendoza has asked, is there a possibility that Mauricio, Beatty, and Vientos are all on the roster? And he said, it's a possibility, but we got to get through today. And the way he answered that question to me, I thought maybe showed his cards a little bit, like the Mets are going to option Mauricio, but you really never know. So we'll see what they decide to do later on today. And of course, I'll be reacting to that on the show tomorrow. Now, the Pirates this year, let's get into the series preview. The Pirates are 32-50. That's the third worst record in Major League Baseball, but they're 20-21 at home. So this is a team that is about 500 playing in their own building. On the road, they're awful. They're 12-29. The Mets took 2 of 3 against the Pirates earlier this season playing at Citi Field. So now we'll see what they can do on the road. There's 3 players on this Pirates roster that have an OPS over 700. You have O'Neal Cruz, who's hit 13 home runs, has 26 stolen bases, but he's only hitting 205 with a 715 OPS. He plays the laziest center field that you're going to find, but he also is an incredible athlete and might make some amazing plays out there. He is an enigma. Andrew McCutchen has been their best hitter this year over the full season. And that's saying something when he's 38 years old and he's got a 744 OPS with 8 home runs in 71 games. Not bad for a 38-year-old, but as your best hitter still, I mean, this isn't a decade ago. Andrew McCutchen should not be the best hitter on the Pittsburgh Pirates, but that's the problem. That's why they're wasting Paul Skeens right now, and that's why they are still far away from contending. Nick Gonzalez is the one Pirate that has an OPS over 800, 824. He's batting 301, but it's only in 21 games played. He got a late start this year due to injury. He is their second baseman. This is the worst offense in Major League Baseball when it comes to hitting home runs. They're dead last. They're second to last in runs scored behind the Royals, so that makes them the worst offense in the National League. Same goes for their OPS. Worst mark in the NL, only 1 point better than the White Sox, who have the worst OPS in Major League Baseball. So this team cannot hit. Now, on the pitching side, they're actually pretty solid, more middle of the pack, 3.87 ERA as a team. Their starter ERA and reliever ERA are both right around that mark as well. Paul Skeens is elevating this rotation. He's got a 2.12 ERA and 106 innings pitched, but he went on Wednesday and will not be pitching this weekend. So the Mets dodge a bullet there. The only starting pitcher that has been announced is Mitch Keller, who will go tonight against David Peterson. But if you look at their last turn through the rotation, Bailey Falter should be in line to pitch this weekend. I would expect on Saturday. Braxton Ashcraft got a start the last turn through the rotation. He's a rookie who actually made his first career start on Monday. Did not allow a run in 3 innings pitched. Gave up 1 hit, no walks, 2 strikeouts. He has 7 relief appearances this year for the Pirates. All told, combining everything, he's got a 1.23 ERA in 14 and 2/3 innings pitched. But in 10 starts in AAA, he's got an ERA over 5. So if the Mets see Braxton Ashcraft, especially considering how they've done against way more highly touted rookies in Mick Abel and Didier Fuentes over the past week, I think they would have a field day with Ashcraft. We'll see who's actually going in this rotation. I'm not sure if Andrew Heaney could potentially factor in this weekend. I think he might be able to. So we'll see exactly what they decide to do. When was Andrew Heaney's last start? I kind of feel like he hasn't pitched this week, but I could be wrong. I pitched on Tuesday. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Yeah, he could be good to go on Sunday. So there's every chance that the Pirates roll with Keller, Falter, and Heaney, and then you're seeing 2 good lefties to close out the weekend who have been pretty solid. But we'll talk about those games throughout the weekend as I will be doing shows, of course, all the way through. So let's get into tonight's matchup, Keller versus Peterson. Mitch Keller had a very good start against the Mets this year, 7 innings pitched, 2 earned runs. He actually only gave up 1 run through the first 6 in the first inning off an RBI double by Brandon Nimmo. The game was knotted up at 1 run apiece, and then Brett Beatty homered off Keller in the 7th inning. The Mets won that game by a score of 2-1. Keller has not gotten any run support this year. I mean, that's the story for all of the Pirates pitchers, really. But when you look at his record of 1-10, that's not a reflection of him. That's a reflection of the team. He's actually been pretty solid with an ERA just over 4. Very good middle of the rotation starter who's been miscast as a frontline guy for the Pirates because they haven't had much in their rotation until, of course, the recent ascension of guys like Paul Skeens. But Keller can definitely pitch a good game against you. So we'll see how he squares up against Peterson tonight. David Peterson coming off a bad start in Philly, but he's been great this year. His 1 start this year against the Pirates, he went 6 innings, allowed 2 earned runs. The Mets won that game by a score of 4-3. So that's where we're at this weekend. It'll be Peterson versus Keller tonight. You're going to see Paul Blackburn pitch on Saturday against potentially Billy Falter. And then on Sunday, very well could be Andrew Heaney versus Frankie Montas. I think this is a great opportunity for Paul Blackburn and for Frankie Montas to have a really good start under the belt. Montas already did that, but to see these 2 guys who are still really working themselves into a full workload as guys that are now suddenly integral parts of this rotation, this is a good start against some bad teams to try to sort of punt themselves up a little bit and maybe carry that momentum going into next week. The only 2 weeks and change left of the first half. The Mets are back in the driver's seat in the National League East. This is a great opportunity this weekend to stack some wins. The Phillies are playing the Braves, so they're going to have a tougher weekend in store, especially because that series is taking place in Atlanta. The Mets will then have an off day on Monday. They'll come back home. They'll face the Brewers and the Yankees before going on the road for one last road trip before the break against the Orioles and the Royals. So you go out this weekend, you at least win a series against the Pirates, if not sweep. Come home, do the best you can to handle business against the Brewers and the Yankees, and the Mets should be in a very good position by the time they get to the All-Star break, especially because their final road trip against a couple teams who have not been playing great baseball this year in the Orioles and the Royals. So that's the slate ahead. That's what the mission is for the Mets. We'll see how they do with it. For the show this weekend, just to give you kind of an update on my recording schedule, for those of you who might know or have been watching the postcast this year, Chris Schubert doing a great job for us. He is out of town a lot here this week and next week. So he's going to make an appearance on Wednesday doing the postcast next week. And then that's pretty much it until I think Sunday of, again, not this Sunday, the following Sunday. So I'm stepping in and doing some live streams after the game for those of you who have gotten used to that rhythm of having a show to go to right after the final out. So I'll be doing that again later on tonight, Friday night. I will not be doing a morning show. I will do a full episode of Locked On Mets. So a 3-segment show. Typically the postcasts are 2 segments. So I'm going to do a full 3-segment show as a postcast, a live stream after the game. And that'll also basically account for your Saturday edition of Locked On Mets. I am going out of town on Saturday. My wife and I are visiting some friends of ours that are a couple hours away. So I'm going to go audio only for Sunday. Most likely, unless my day gets away from me, but I am planning to do an audio only show that'll be there on Sunday. So no live stream or postcast after the game on Saturday. It's actually an afternoon game, a late afternoon game, but no live stream then. On Sunday, I think I'll be back in time to do a post game stream. And then I will have your typical shows Monday through Friday next week. And then I'll be doing the double dipping a lot as Chris continues to be out of town. So you want that extra Locked On Mets content, you're getting it. If you haven't checked out my live stream, breaking down the Mets win against the Braves, I encourage you to do so. But I will be back for another live stream later on tonight. I appreciate all of you for tuning in, whether it was on YouTube or your podcast feed. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube or to your podcast feeds and check out Locked On MLB Game Night, the show that'll take you around all the action in Major League Baseball with insight from our local experts. Again, you can find Locked On MLB Game Night on the Locked On MLB podcast feed, as well as the Locked On MLB YouTube channel.